Today's daf is Chulin daf Samach Gimel, and we are 6 lines from the top of daf Samach Gimel Amid Aleph Amar Rav Yehuda. So we're moving along discussing the halachas of kosher birds versus non-kosher birds. And we saw the Mishnah already made the observation on daf Nun Tes Amid Aleph that whereas the Torah, when describing the kosher animal versus the non-kosher animal, same is true for the kosher fish versus the non-kosher fish. The Torah states specific simanim, how it is you're supposed to know what's kosher and non-kosher. For example, as it relates to the behema, the Torah says, Kol mafreses parsa v'shoishas shes aprosos. In other words, if it has split hooves, malas gera, additionally, it choose its cud, that you're allowed to eat. However, if it's a malagera and it's not mafres parsa, or if it's mafres parsa and it's not malas gera, and like the Rambam says in the beginning of Perek Beis, hilchas machalos asura is kolshkein, if it's not a malas gera and it doesn't have split hooves, there the halacha is, there you're not allowed to eat it. So the Torah delineates very clearly with simonim how you're supposed to know what makes up the kosher behema and what's the non-kosher behema. As it relates to the oif, however, the Torah is more ambiguous. The Torah doesn't give any siman in how you're supposed to know what a kosher oif is versus a non-kosher oif. What the Torah does do is the Torah mentions many birds and says that those birds are not kosher. And it almost appears, just from reading the psukim in the Torah, that those birds are not kosher. Everything else, however, is kosher. Stating that, we saw it's rather complicated, and the truth is, just to go through these dafim that we're learning now, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, is a challenge in of itself, let alone when you go into the Rishonim and the Achronim. And I don't mean the names of the birds in the pictures. That's the easy part. It's more understanding what exactly Rashi Shita was, what exactly Tosfos Shita was. So in the allotted time that we have, we try to do what we do. But regardless, what emerged, Pashup Shat from the Gemara, is that the reality is it's not only the 24 birds that are mentioned in the Torah that are halachically considered non-kosher birds, but really there's one of those 20 birds that's considered the paradigm for the non-kosher bird, and anything that's similar to that would also be considered non-kosher. And that was the bird referred to by the Torah as the nesher, loosely translated as the eagle, stating that, we'll see a little bit later, that it's not so simple amongst the Rishonim that the nesher is what we know today as the eagle. But regardless, the Torah, or Chazal, said that just like the nesher is lacking 4 simanim, or it has 4 unique character traits, we learn from there that any animal that has those 4 traits would be considered non-kosher. If, however, an oif does not have the 4 traits that the nesher has, in other words, it doesn't have those 4 simane tuma, rather it has even 1 siman of Taira, the halach is that would be enough to render it kosher. What then are the simone Taira? For a behema, it's mafreses parsa v'shoishas shesa prasos on the one hand, and malaskeir on the other hand. As it relates to the oif, it's number 1, it has to have an etzbe yasera, it has to have a zefek, its kurkavan has to be able to be peeled, and it has to be an oif that's enoi doiris. We also saw Rashi and Tosfos both speak out that any oif that's doiris biyadua, that it's an oif tamis. You have to reconcile that with everything that we just said. But regardless, whereas as it relates to the behema, the Torah made it very clear. There's 2 simanim of what makes up a kosher animal. When it comes to an oif, the Torah didn't mention anything about the kosher bird. What the Torah said was there's a whole list of non-kosher birds. Okay, so what's the list of non-kosher birds? So the truth is that just from being Mavis Edgerod, you'll see there are 2 lists. There's a list in Parashas Shmini, and then there's a list again in Parashas Re'eh, which is not such a chiddush, because Re'eh is in Sefer Dvarim, which is Mishnah Torah, which to a degree is Chazara. Regardless, you have the list in Parashas Shmini, and you have the list again in Parashas Re'eh. The list in Parashas Shmini reads as follows. We're going to go through each one, or almost each one in today's daf. The Torah says, "V'es'elu tishaktu min ha'oif lo yeyachlu sheketzim." Ves ha-nesher, ves ha-peres, ves ha-azniyah, ves ha-do'a, ves ha-aya lemina, es kol oirev leminoi, ves bas ha-yana, ves ha-tachmos, ves ha-shochav, ves ha-neitz lemineo, ves ha-koitz, ves ha-sholoch, ves ha-yanshuf, ves ha-tinchemes, ves ha-koz, ves ha-rocham, ves ha-chasida ha-anofa lemina, ves ha-duchifas, ves ha-atalev. Those make up the list in Parashas Shmini of the oifos that are non-kosher. If you look in Parashas Re'eh, there's another list, and the list is very, very similar, but it's not the same list. In fact, there's 3 differences between what the list in Parashas Shmini says and the list in Parashas Re'eh. Number one, in Parashas Shmini, we have one of the non-kosher birds mentioned is the da'ah. The nesha, the peres da'azniya, number 4 on the list is ves hada'ah. The da'ah is not mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. Additionally, in Parashas Re'eh, there are 2 birds listed as non-kosher that are not mentioned in Parashas Shmini. Number 1, you have not the da'ah, but you have the ra'ah, and number 2, you have the daya. So we had here in Parashas Shmini that's hada'ah, the es ha'aya lemina. In Parashas Re'eh, we don't have the da'ah, we have the ra'ah, Re'eh ra'ah. We have the ra'ah, and whereas we have the ayah in Parashas Re'eh, we also have another bird that rhymes with ayah, and that is the daya. Either way, there's 3 differences between Parashas Shmini and Parashas Re'eh. In Parashas Shmini, we have the da'ah. We don't have the da'ah in Parashas Re'eh. In Parashas Re'eh, we have the ra'ah and the daya, both of which we don't have in Parashas Shmini. Why is that? That's going to be discussed in great detail in today's daf. Regardless, the Gemara is going to begin with a detailed discussion trying to understand what exactly these birds mention in the Torah as the oifos tmeima. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said shalach, which is one of the oifos that are tamei. Which bird is that? How do you identify that? That's the bird that scoops up fish from the bottom of the sea. Du chifas, what's that? Shahoidoi kafos. It's hoid. It has this hat, so to speak, of feathers, which is really nice. It gives it its beauty. Its kafos, it gets tied down to its head. Rashi seems to describe it as its feathers can sometimes pop up or can sometimes be folded into his head. Thus, kafos, milosh, and tied. Regardless, it's the word du chifas. It's made up of hoidoi and kafos. It's the bird whose hoidoi is kafos. Havi shamir lebeis hamikdash. That's the bird that Shlomo HaMelech used to bring the shamir to the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi quotes the Gemara Masechtas Gittin, where the Gemara says that when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, he had the assistance of a worm known as the shamir, and Shlomo HaMelech was trying to get the shamir, but he didn't have access to it. So there was a Tarnagol that knew how to bring the shamir to Shlomo HaMelech. The Tarnagol that Shlomo HaMelech used to get the shamir, that's this duchifas, shahoidei kafos. It's one of the non-kosher birds mentioned in the Torah. Omar, he would say the following pasuk, Mishpatecha tohim rabba. The mishpat of HaKadosh Baruch Hu reaches all the way to the depths of the sea. Because as we said, the shalach goes to the depths of the sea to find its prey. So you see that those birds that are on the bottom of the sea, they're subject to the mishpat of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because through the shalach, they're being consumed. When Ruyechana would see an ant, Omar, he would say, Tzidkascha kaharekel. Ironically, he would say that tzedakah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is massive. It's like the mountains. He was looking at a very small creature, not a very large creature, but Rabbi Yecha was trying to say that the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so abundant, it's so incredible that Hashem does tzedakah and chesed even with the lowly namala, even with the little ant. Amar Amemer said, Likni ubatni shayim. These are 2 birds, they're kosher birds. Shaknoy ubatnoy, makam shenagu lechel oichlin. It depends. If you live in a place where it's makam shenagu to eat it, then you can eat it. Makam shenagu shaloi lechel. If you live in a place where the minig is not to eat it, don't eat it. Says the Gemara, Atubim and Haga Talia Milsa. What does this mean? It's totally a minig. Yeah, there's a concept of chumras and kulas, and there's a whole parak in Masechtas Psachim that talks about makam shenagu, but obviously that's only with regards to things that have nothing to do with halacha. Whether these birds are kosher birds or non-kosher birds should not be totally a minute, but rather you should have to look at the simanim, go through these difficult sugyas that we're learning right now, and determine whether it's kosher or not kosher. How could it be totally in a makam shenagu? If you're allowed to do a malacha on Erev Pesach, okay, makam shenagu, yeah, makam shenagu not. Sometimes you find a concept or a mother place can talk about nefesh should be machmer, but how can makam shenagu be the determining factor whether these birds are permissible to eat or not? So the Gemara says, no, loy kasha. Yesterday's not. These birds all had one siman of a kosher bird. Being that they had one siman of a kosher bird, the only birds that you would have to rule out before you eat it is the paris and the ozniya. We said that the paris and the ozniya were loy shchichi b'yishuv, but apparently there were places where they were. Sometimes. Thus, the Mekayimos, where sometimes it was a paris and ozniya, people would not eat any bird that had one siman of a kosher bird, because they were afraid that it might be the paris and the ozniya. Where people lived in areas that there was no Peres Vaznia, so you didn't have to worry about it. So that's this b'minhag Talia Milsa. Not that the halacha is based on minig. We know exactly what this bird is. It has one kosher siman. If you live in an area where it's shchichi, Peres and Aznia, you can't eat it. Why? Because you're afraid that it might be the Peres and the Aznia. If you live in a place where it's lo shchichi, Peres Vaznia, then you would be allowed to eat. Amar Abaye, kui vikakui asiri, kiko usa. Shari, but the Marava, the Gemara says Malki Love, that even though Abaye said that Kiko Usa is okay to eat, and Eretz Yisrael they used to give Malkus for people that eat it. For Karula, they had a different name for it. They used to call it Tachvas. Tan Rabbanon, Tin Shames. That Tin Shames is one of the non-kosher birds mentioned in the list. It's in the list in Parshas Shmini. It's in the list in Parshas Re'eh. Says the Gemara, what exactly is this Tin Shames? It's the Ba'us Shebe Oifos. Maybe it's the Ba'os Shebeshratzim, and the reference of that is another pasuk in Parashat Shmini, where the Torah is not talking about the non-kosher birds. The Torah is talking about the Shmoina Shratzim. So we know that there are Shmoina Shratzim, whole parak in Masechtas Shabbos, where if they die and they fall on somebody, the person becomes tummy. So not every sheretz is metama. There's only the special group of the Shmoina Shratzim. This is an exclusive group of shratzim, of insect, where they have the ability to be metama to sheretz. And when the Torah lists the Shmoina Shratzim, it says v'hanaka v'hakoyach v'halta v'achoymet v'hatin shames. So there's the tin shames bird, and then there's the tin shames sheretz. So the Gemara, the Brisa speaks out that how do you know when it says tin shames among the non-kosher birds, it's referring to the Ba'os Sheba'oifos, it's the tin shames bird. Maybe it's referring to the Ba'os Shebeshratzim, and the Gemara gives a very obvious answer. This is easy. This is Yud Gimel Midas Shatar Nidreshes Vehem. Tanit Rabbi Yishmael 101. Why? Because just look at the context. It doesn't make sense. We're talking about a whole bunch of birds that are non-kosher. We mentioned the tin shames. We're probably not referring to the sheretz tin shames. We're probably referring to the oif tin shames. You find a similar brisa in the reverse, in the context of shratzim. The tin shames, the brisa over there was discussing the shmoina shratzim, and it mentions it tin shames and says that is the sheretz type of tin shames. Maybe the tin shames mentioned the parish of the shratzim is actually referring to the tin shames of the oifes. Look at the context. One of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bem is Dover Alamed Ben Yana. In English, look at the context, right? What's the context? We're talking about Oifis, then the Tin Shemes is probably the Tin Shemes, Sheba Oifis. We're talking about Shratzim, then the Tin Shemes is probably the Sheretz version. Either way, Amar Abaya, Ba'os Sheba Oifis. What exactly is this Ba'os Sheba Oifis? Kifuf, Ba'os Sheba Shratzim. What is that? Kurpadoi. If you look at Rashi varfs a few French words when describing what exactly this tin shemes is. And if you look at the English translation of the French words that Rashi quotes, it seems that Rashi had two pshatim of what the tin shemes is. Either the owl or the bat. The income economy. Amar Rav Yehuda, Ka'as. What is the Ka'as? Zu akuk. Racham. That's another one of the non-kosher birds. Zu shrakrak. Amar Rav Yechanan. Lama nikra shmoi racham. Why is this shrakrak called racham? Because kiven shaba, as soon as it comes, racham, ba'u rachamim la'olam. It brings rachamim to the world. Rashi says rachamim, one word, matar. So apparently the racham would come, it would make noise, and you knew that it was going to rain. So being that this bird would signal rain is rachamim, thus it's called the racham because it brings rachamim la'olam. Amar Rabbi Barabaya, Behudi Yosef Amidi. This is only true if it's sitting v'avet shrakrak and it makes noise. English shrieks. V'gemiri di'i Yosef ha'aravasha. That if the racham would sit not just on something, but it would sit it would sit on the ground, also meshicha. That would be a sign that not only is rachamim coming la'olam, Zok Rashi matar, but it means Mashiach is coming. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Eshrik Elohem va'akabtzem kifedisem v'ravu kamay ravu. So before Mashiach comes, Eshrik Elohem. What's the Eshrika? It's that bird that's the shrakrak, which is the racham, which is a non-kosher bird. Interesting. But regardless, when that bird makes noise, when it is oisa, it's shrak-rak. Ordinarily, as long as it's sitting, what it means is that Rachamin is coming lo'olam. Thus made Rachamin Rashi, one word, matar. If it would sit on the ground, then it would do that. It means Mashiach's coming. I once saw a bird. It sat in a plowed field. Visharak, it shrieked. Va'asa galol, and you know what happened? Mashiach didn't come. A rock came. Afsakei l'moiche, and it cracked its skull. Amalei, so he told about who buyed the havla. That bird was a liar. It wasn't telling the truth. And as a result, they got punished for not telling the truth. But an erlich racham, an erlich shrakrak, it would only shriek sitting on the ground if Mashiach's coming. And if you see that happening, it means you have to get ready. Tan Rabban, an oirev. What is the oirev? Is that oirev? It's the oirev. Okay. Es kol oirev. When it says in the Torah, es kol oirev, it's lahavi oirev ha'amaki. It's coming to include not just the oirev, as in the standard, typical oirev, but also the oirev ha'amaki. And when it says the word laminoi, it's lahavi oirev haba berashe yonim. And the Gemara is going to explain. So again, the pasuk is 4 words. Eis kol oirev laminoi. We spoke a little bit about this pasuk in yesterday's daf. Eis kol oirev laminoi. So it's the rabbis, number 1, the oirev. That's what the word oirev means. Eis kol is coming to include the oirev ha'amaki. And then when the Torah says leminai, the last word in the pasuk, it's lahavi oirev haba b'rashi yoyim. It's the Gemara. Oirev ze oirev. Atu kaman koi. Right? It sounds like there was some confusion of what exactly the oirev was. So the Tana, the Brayso said, you want to know what the oirev is? It's the oirev. Now, if the oirev was sitting here and the Tana was pointing to the oirev, then it would make sense. Oh, you see that oirev? That's what it is. But v'chayra, there was no oirev in Beis Medrash when the Tana was saying over this halacha. There were stenders and gemaras. So what does it mean? Oirev ze oirev. How are you supposed to know what that means? So the Gemara says, Aleima oirev ze oirev uchma. It means the stam oirev, which is a black raven. The Chenu Omer. How do you know that the raven is black? It's a pasuk at Shir Hashirim. Roishoi kesem paz, kfutzoisav taltalim, shchayrois ka'oirev. It's black like an oirev. Ha'amaki. What is the oirev ha'amaki that's included from the words eis kol chivara? That's not the black raven, but rather it's the white raven. The Chenu Omer, the pasuk says umareu amoik min ha'ar. The context over there is the Torah is talking about a white nega, and it describes its appearance as being deeper than the flesh, deeper than the skin. Umareu amoik. So you see that white is considered amoik, thus the white raven is called the oirev ha'amaki. Additionally, another pasuk can marry chamo ha'amukum anatzel. The chamo's appearance is considered to be more amoik than the shade. It's lighter, so you see lighter is considered amoik. Thus the oirev ha'amaki is the light color, it's the white raven as opposed to the black raven. The oirev ha'aba b'rashi yavonim. What does that mean? So we said that when it says it's called oirev lamina, lamina is coming to include that oirev that's the Rosh Hayavad. Amar Papa Loi Tema. Don't think that what it means is the Asi Bereish Yoini. That it's the Oirev that's like it leads the pigeons. It's the Rosh of the Yoina. That's not what it means. Elo the Dami Rachel of the Yoina. There's an Oirev whose head looks like the head of a pigeon, and that's that Oirev Haba Berosh Yoinim that the Torah includes is also Aser because it says Eis called Oirev Lamina. Zok the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon. Ha-netz, it says in the Torah, Vespas hayana, vesatachmotz, vesashochav, ve'es ha-netz lamineo. What's the netz? Lahavi es bas chiri, bar chiria. My bar chiria, Amar Abaye shurinka, Amar Rav Yehuda, ha-chasida. What's the chasida? Zu daya levana. It's the bird known as the daya levana. Lama nekashma chasida, she'oisa chasidus in chavreisel. Because it does chesed, Rashi says, michalekes mezoyneisel. It shares its food in chavreisel, and it's for that reason it's called the chasida. The Sharim said that if the Chasida does chesed, so why is it a non-kosher bird? It should have been a kosher bird. So he said you have to medayik the Lashon HaGemara. The Chasida does chesed, but only in Chavreisel. She only does chesed with her friends. She doesn't do chesed with people that are not part of her chevra, that are not her friends. As a result, it's a non-kosher bird. Anafa, what's that bird? Zudaya ragzonis. Anafa, why is this angry bird, so to speak, called Daya Ragzonis? So why is it called Anafa Shemana Efes in Chavreisel? Rashi says it's a pasuk in the Torah. Gambi is Hisanaf Hashem bi lemanchem. Right, you find Vayisanaf is a lashon of anger. So that's the idea of the Anafa. It's the Daya Ragzonis. Amar Rav Chanon, Bar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Chanon Brei Rava, Amar Rav Esrim V'Arba Oifois Tmeim. If you sit down and you do the math, and you count all the birds, what you're going to see is there are 24 birds. So again, a little bit of an introduction, just to chazer over what we spoke at in the intro to the daf, because the next part of the daf, it's not so hard, but it's going to get technical. And that is, the Torah mentions the non-kosher birds twice in the Torah. The Torah mentions it in Parshas Shmini, and the Torah mentions it in Parshas Re'eh again. Incidentally, in Parshas Re'eh, in Mishnah Torah, when the Torah chazers over the list of the non-kosher birds, so over there, the Torah prefaces the list of non-kosher birds by saying, Kol tzipar tahira toichelu. You're allowed to eat every kosher bird. I saw in the Sefer Magadim Chadashim, he brings from the Chidah, in his Machzik Bracha, when you're there, Simin Pei Beis, who says a Dover Nifla. Kol tzipar tahira toichelu. He said, Shamati b'shem Arizal. That the word tzipar, the oisis tzei, tzadik, pei, vav, resh, which the Torah is mentioning here in the context of the kosher bird, called tzipar tahira teichelu, is a remes to the four simani taira of a bird. What are the four simanim? An etzba yisera, a zefek, an einoi doires, and a kurkavan. He says the second letter of each one of the four simanim is oisis tzipar. Etzba, aleph tzadik, that's the tzadik. Zefek, Zayin Pei, that's the Pei. Doires is Dalet Vav, that's the Vav. And Kurkavan is Kuf Resh, that's the Resh. So he said, Sipar is Etzpa, Zefek, Doires, Kurkavan. He brings, from the Sefer Avir Harayim, that's the toldus of the Avnei Nezer, that the Avnei Nezer was once told this vart of Narizal, and the first thing he said was that no Narizal could have said something like this. It's Mamish Divrei Nevios, that called Sipar, Tahira Techelu, in Sipar is Merumas, the four Simani Tair. But then the Avnei Nezer was Moisef. He said that really, what's the Vav? We said Doires. The truth is, the simon is not that it's Doires. The simon is that it's Einoi Doiris. So he said, if anything, it should have been Einoi Doiris. Why is it Doiris? He said, the truth is the Vav is silent. Because when you say Tzipar, you don't pronounce the Vav. It's Tzadik Peresh. In Yeshem Lamikra, there's not even a Vav. It's only in the Yeshem Lamasiris you have the Vav. So you know why the Vav is silent? Because it's Einoi Doiris. It's not really Doiris, it's Einoi Doiris. But regardless, so it's called Tzipar Doira Toichelu. You have the list in Parashas Shmini, you have the list in Parashas Re'eh. Now, we said there's three differences between the two lists. Number one, in Parashas Shmini, the Torah mentions a bird called the Da'ah, which is the non-kosher bird. It's not mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. Additionally, in Parashas Re'eh, there's a bird called the Ra'ah. Re'eh Ra'ah. There's a bird called the Ra'ah, which is mentioned as a non-kosher bird, which is not mentioned in Parashas Shmini. Additionally, you have the Daya, which is mentioned in Parashas Re'eh, which is not mentioned in Parashas Shmini. Now, if you do the math, in Parashas Shmini, there are 20 non-kosher birds mentioned. If you do the math, in Parashas Re'eh, there are 21 non-kosher birds that are mentioned, right? It's the same list. We said there's one that Parashas Shmini has that Parashas Re'eh doesn't have. There are two that Parashas Re'eh has that Parashas Shmini doesn't have. So you have a net positive of one in Parashas Re'eh. So it's 20 in Parashas Shmini, and it's 21 in Parashas Re'eh. Now, we've kept on saying, we had it already right in the beginning of the Sugi, there are 24 non-kosher animals. So how do you get to 24? It's either 20, or it's 21, or if you want to add the Da'ah to the list of the 21 in Parashas Re'eh, then Hechsins, you would have 22. How do you end up with 24? That's the Gemara. So again, Amar Rav Chanan bar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Chanan Breder Rav Amar Rav. As from Abba Oifis Tameinim, there are 24 non-kosher birds. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rav Chizda, Rav Chizda, De'echa. How do you come up with 24? Either Vayikra, if you go through the birds that are mentioned in Sefer Vayikra, Parashas Shmini, Esrim Av, it's 20. Either Mishnah Torah, if you want to count the ones that are mentioned in Mishnah Torah, which is Parashas Re'eh, Esrim V'chadav, it's 21. V'chitei Medod, Chsiv Vayikra, Lo Chsiv Mishnah Torah, Shad Yalayu. And if what it means is you have to take the one that's mentioned in Parashas Shmini, add it to the 21 that are mentioned in Parashas Re'eh, so then you have 21 plus 1. Back to the envelope arithmetic. Akati Esrim V'treinav. Then what you're going to end up with is 22. So how do you have 24? Amalei, he told the Hachi Amar Avudi Imach Mishmei de Rav. Lemina. There's 4 times that the Torah mentions the word Lemina in Parashas Shmini. We just had now, it's called Oirev Lemina. But there's 4 such mentions in Parashas Shmini. Each one is coming to be marba another non-kosher bird. In other words, what you have is an additional 4. But the Gemara says it still doesn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's do the math. Because l'chura, you should have the 21 in Parashas Re'eh, add the da'ah of Parashas Shmini, which gives you 22, plus lamina lemineo is another 4. You should end up with 26. Amrabaya. So Abaya said, da'ah v'ra'ah achas. You have to say that the da'ah mentioned in Parshas Shmini and the Ra'ah mentioned in Parshas Re'eh are really one and the same. So you don't have one in Shmini that's not mentioned in Re'eh and one in Re'eh that's not mentioned in Shmini. We said the Da is in Parshas Shmini, it's not mentioned in Parshas Re'eh. The Ra'ah is mentioned in Parshas Re'eh, it's not mentioned in Parshas Shmini. They're one and the same. The Da and the Ra are the same. And Abaye said, I'll prove it to you. Because if you're going to tell me that the Ra'ah and the Da are two different birds, when the Torah has it over the birds in Mishnah Torah, the intention was not to subtract from what was already mentioned in Parashas Shmini. It was either to chazer or more likely to add something that wasn't mentioned in Torah's Kainim. It's Maishna Hacha the Chsiv Da, or Maishna Hacha the Chsiv Ra of a life Chsiv Da. So how's it possible that in Parashas Re'eh the Torah would omit something that was already mentioned in Parashas Shmini? Elish Mami, no, it must be. It's not possible that there's something in Shmini that's not mentioned in Re'eh, because Mishnah Torah is Chazara plus, and here it's a subtraction. You have something mentioned in Shmini that's not mentioned in Re'eh. It must be the Min Ra V'da Achasi. It must be the one and the same. Okay, so if they're one and the same, how many do you have now? So you have 21 plus 4, right? We thought we had 22, but we just omitted one because we said the Ra and the Da that we were counting as 2 really should be counted as 1. Okay, 22 minus 1 is 21, plus the 4, Lamineo, you end up with 25. So you still only have 25. Abaye said, Kashem Shera'a V'da Achasi, just like the Ra and the Da are 1, Kach Aya V'daya Achasi. So too the Aya and the Daya are also 1. So the Ayah is mentioned in Parashas Shmini and in Parashas Re'eh. The Daya is not mentioned in Parashas Shmini. That's the other one that's mentioned in Parashas Re'eh that wasn't mentioned in Parashas Shmini. The Ra and the Daya. In fact, when the Torah brings it, it says V'hara'ah, that's Ha'ayah, V'hadaya Lamina. So say Abaya that just like the Ra and the Da, they sound similar, they're the same. So to the Ayah and the Daya, which also sound similar, they're also the same. And he said, I'll prove it to you, Abaya. It has to be that way. Because if you're going to tell me that the Ayah and the Daya are not the same, Mishnah Torah Lesufa Diyasa. We said Mishnah Torah is coming to add to Parashas Shmini. Ma'ishna hacha d'chsev lemina a'ayah, u'ma'ishna hasam d'chsev lemina adaya. When the Torah mentions the Ayah in Parashas Shmini, it says the Ayah and it says lemina. That's hada'a, that's ha'ayah, lemina. That's Parashas Shmini. So it says the word lemina with regards to the Ayah. But when the Torah mentions the Ayah in Parashas Re'eh, it doesn't say Lamina. It says V'hara, that's Ha'ayah, V'hadaya Lamina. It doesn't say that the Ayah is going to be Lamina. Doesn't make sense. Lamina, we said, is going to be marba something. It's called Oirev Lamina. We said it's coming to be marba a certain type of Oirev. So clearly, Lamina is being marba something. It's adding to what you would otherwise think. If that's the case, if it mentioned Lamina by the Ayah in Parashas Shmini, and it doesn't mention Lamina by the Ayah in Parashas Re'eh, it would mean that Parashas Re'eh is subtracting from what we already have in Parashas Shmini. And that can't be. Ella, you know what you have to say? Shema Mina, Ayah v'daya achasi. Ayah and Daya must be 1. If Ayah and Daya are 1, so we're not subtracting, because it says Ayah Lamina in Parashas Shmini, it says Daya Lamina in Parashas Re'eh. Ayah and Daya is the same thing, so both by Ayah and by Daya, you both have the Lamina. Point is if Ayah and Daya is the same, we were counting them as 2. Really, they're only 1. So you end up with how much? 20. So we thought you had 22. How'd you get 22? You took the 21 of Parashas Re'eh, you added the Da'ah, which is mentioned in Parashas Shmini, it's not mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. You have 22 plus 4, you have 26. How does it stem with the Messiah of 24? The answer is that we were counting Ra and Da as 2. We were also counting Ayah and Daya, that both mentioned separately in the same parasha, in Parashas Re'eh, as 2. Really, Ayah and Daya is 1, Ra and Da is 1. So it's not 22 plus 4, it's 20 plus 4. That's how you end up with your 20. It says the Gemara, if Ayah and Daya really 1, why did Torah mention both? So the Gemara could Tanya. Rebbe explained it in a brisa. Ekrani Ayah, Daya lama nemra, because we wanted to be we wanted to make this as clear as possible. There must have been some confusion with what this bird was called. Some people called it Ayah, some people called it Daya. That's how Ayah v'hadaya lamina, to make it clear, the Ayah, the Daya, not that they're 2 birds, but it doesn't matter what you call it. The bottom line is, it's 100% awesome. Why did the Torah chazer over the kosher and non-kosher animals in Parashas Re'eh? Because there's one halacha that's mentioned in Parashas Re'eh that we don't know from Parshas Shmini, and that is the halacha of the Shesua. Uba oifos. Why did the Torah chazer over the oifos? Mipnei hara. Says the Gemara. The hasam la sufe. The Shesua is a whole different animal, as the Gemara had discussed earlier. So l'chayra, and we're equating the hisafa of the behemoths mentioned in Parashas Re'eh to the hisafa of the oifos mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. So it doesn't sound like they should be the same. We should be consistent. And just like the hisafa of behemoth is a new behemoth, maybe by oifos it's a new behemoth. We said now there's no new behemoth. It's the same list. The list in Parashas Shmini is the same as the list in Parashas Re'eh. Right, at the end of the day, there's 20 mentioned in Parashas Shmini. That's the 20. 20 in Parashas Shmini, and the 21 mentioned in Parashas Re'eh is the same list. It's really 20 plus the Lamina. But regardless, it sound a little bit from this Braisa that the Hisafa Behema, which is a new type of Behema, is the same as the Hisafa the Oifes, and the Gemara says, no. Hasam leisufe, hacha lefrushe. It's up to Gemara, what we just said. And that is, there are 24 non-kosher birds, upliga de rabavo. This is not consistent with something that Rabavo said. Rabavo said, Ra'ah zu ayah. The Ra is the ayah. Why is it called the Ra? The reason it's called the Ra is because it can see very far. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Iyov, Nasiv lo yudai oyit, v'lo shizafatu ein ayah. It's mashma from the spot that even the ayah can't see it. It sees so far. Tana, how far could the ayah see? It could be standing in Bavel, and it's able to see a nevel in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so before we go weiter, and the Gemara makes the cheshbon. So says the Gemara, what we just said, that there's 24 birds based on two assumptions: that the ra and the da are the same, and the ayah and the daya are the same. Thus, you have 20 mentions of non-kosher birds, plus lamina. That's how you end up with 24. It's pliga de Rabavo. This doesn't work with what Rabavo said. Why? Because Rabavo said that the ra is the ayah. And if that's the case, according to Rabavo, you're not going to have 24, you're going to end up with 23. Why? Because if the ra is the ayah, and the ra is the da, and the ayah is the daya, so that means that those four just became one. It's all one and the same. We had the ra and the da is one, and the ayah and the daya is the one. If the ra and the ayah are also one, that means the ra and the da, the ayah and the daya are four names for the same exact bird. So if it's all one, then what we counted as two, because we had the ra and the da one, the ayah and the daya one, so in our cheshbon of 24, the four were two. In Rabavo's cheshbon of 24, the four are really one. If that's the case, it must be that he has one less than what we have. So if we have 24, Rabavo had 23. Thus, says the Gemara, Upliga de Rabavo. Our cheshbon, Rav Chizda said that there's 24 non-kosher birds, doesn't share with Rabavo. Now the Gemara is going to just make the cheshbon inside. How do you know? Maybe Rabavo holds of 24 as well, but Rabavo doesn't agree that either the ra is the da, or that the ayah is the daya. He holds that the ra is the ayah, but that one of the others are not the same. If that's the case, maybe you can end up with the same exact 24. And the Gemara is going to say it's not possible, based on the cheshbon that we said before. Because we proved that the ra and the da were one. We proved that the ayah and the daya were one. These weren't just svaras. This the Gemara proved. How did the Gemara prove it? Because the Gemara said if the ra and the da are not the same, that it comes out that the da is mentioned in Parashas Re'eh, and it's not. It is mentioned in Parashas Shmini, and it's not mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. That means Parashas Re'eh omitted one of the non-kosher birds that were mentioned in Parashas Shmini, and that can't be because Mechti the Gemara said Mishnah Torah lo Yisufi da'asa. Mishnah Torah is coming to be Mosif. So it must be that somewhere the da is mentioned in Parashas Re'eh. Where's it mentioned? Oh, it's probably the ra and the da, one and the same. So it wasn't just the svara. We had proved it. We also proved that ayah and daya was the same. How did we prove it? Because when the Torah mentions the ayah in Parashas Shmini, it says Vesa ayah lamina. When the Torah mentions the ayah in Parashas Re'eh, it doesn't say Vesa ayah lamina. Mina is coming to include something. So if it doesn't say lamina in Parashas Re'eh, that means the list of Parashas Re'eh is taking away again from Parashas
Shmini, and again, Mechti Mishnah Torah Leisuvei, so they can't be. So we said, oh, must be the Ayah and the Ayah is the same. So even though it doesn't say Ayah Lamina in Parshas Rei, it says Daya Lamina in Parshas Rei. And Daya Lamina and Ayah Lamina is essentially the same thing. So the Gemara is going to taina that really you can't say that Rabbi Vo holds of 24. And although Rabbi Vo said the Ra and the Ayah are the same, but maybe he holds the Ra and the Da aren't the same. Or maybe he holds the Ayah and the Daya aren't the same. So just like we made 2 from these 4, Rabbi Vo also made 2 from these 4, albeit a different 2, because both of the 2s that we made from 4, both of those cheshbonos were proven. The ayah had to be the daya, and the ra had to be the da. And it's not possible for Rabbi Vo to disagree with that. It's not possible for Rabbi Vo to disagree with that. And Rabbi Vo holds that the ra is the ayah, so if the ra has to be the da, and the ayah has to be the daya, and the ra also has to be the ayah, it means that the ra also has to be the daya, and the da also has to be the ayah and the ra. It means it's all the same, right? So if it's all the same, so it comes out, you have 23, thus upligid Rabbi Vo. So everything we just spoke out, Balpeh, we'll see inside. So the Gemara. Midira, Hainu Aya, Michlal Deda, Lav Hainu Ra. The only way to have Rabbi Vo being 24, if the Ra is the Aya, is by saying that the Da is not the Ra. But the Gemara says you can't say that, because Mechti Mishnah Torah Leisuvei da also. Ma'ishal Ch'tiv Da, Ma'ishal Hasam D'Lo Yiksiv Da, Elav Shma Min Ha'Davar Achasi. It has to be one and the same, because otherwise you have the Da in Shmini that you don't have in Re'eh. That's not possible. So the Gemara says, okay, the only other way to make Rabbi Vo work and say Rabbi Vo holds of 24 is Midira, Hainu Aya, Michlal Deda, Lav Hainu Aya. Maybe the Da and the Aya is not the same. But the Gemara says that it can't either, because Ma'ishal Hasam D'Chsiv L'Min Aya, U'Ma'ishal Hachad Lo Yiksiv L'Min Aya, Ella Adaya, Ella Shmamina, Davara, Daya V'Aya, Achasi. If they're all one, must be Rabbi Vo has 1 less than we have, because we made from those 4 2. Rabbi Vo made from those 4 1. We had 24. Must be Rabbi Vo has 23. Says the Gemara, Upliga the Rabbi Vo. Drop more Gemara. Tanya Isa ben Yehuda Omer. Meya Oifais Tmeim Yesh ben Mizrach. V'kulan min Ayohen. There are 24 birds ben Mizrach, and they're all different types of ayah. Tani Avimi Breid Rabbi Vo. Zayim Meis Mine Dogin. There's 700 types of dogin. V'ches Meis Mine Chagavim. 800 types of grasshoppers. Ula Oifais ein Mispar. Says the Gemara. Oifais, what do you mean? Chavtal I thought it's 24. Elula Oifais Tahirim ein Mispar means there's no limit to the amount of Oifais Tahirim there are. Exhale. We'll pick up the Gemara tomorrow. But before we end, just to end with one ha'ara, and that is, so we're discussing over here the oifos tmei. And as mentioned, the oifos, tahirim, and tmeim, the simanim that make up a kosher bird and a non-kosher bird, are not mentioned in the Torah. So whereas by the Behemoth, the Torah singles out exactly what the simanim are of a kosher animal and a non-kosher animal, when it comes to the bird, the Torah doesn't mention anything about what makes up a kosher bird and a non-kosher bird. What the Torah does do is the Torah mentions 20, 21, which is really 24 non-kosher birds. As it relates to everything else, it's a little confusing what exactly we're supposed to take away from the sugya. Rashi, Tosfos, as we mentioned in the introduction, Ayin B'Rishonim and the Achrayim. But the pashta seems to be that as long as an oif has one of the 4 kosher simanim, Einoi Doires, Kurkavanoi Niflach, has an etzbi yaseir or a zefek, that would be enough for it to be kosher. And the reason is because the paradigm of the non-kosher bird is the nesher. It's the first of the birds that the Torah mentions is non-kosher. It's first on the list in Parshas Shmini. It's first on the list in Parshas Re'eh. So the paradigm of the non-kosher bird became the nesher. And being that the paradigm became the nesher, it's for that reason. Just like the nesher doesn't have any simanei Torah. It's a doires. It doesn't have the etzbi yaseira. It doesn't have a zefek. Its kurkavan is not nikla. So too, in order for a bird to be considered non-kosher, it would have to be similar to the nesher. It's interesting that the nesher was chosen as the symbol of the non-kosher bird, because the nesher has a lot of significance within in the Torah Shabbat. I mean, you find the nesher mentioned very often. Number one, Yecheskel Hanavi, in Yecheskel Perek Aleph, in the Maisa of Merkavah. So when Yecheskel looks up, he says he saw the Kisei HaKavod, and he saw 4 faces on the Kisei HaKavod. He saw the Demus Adam, he saw the Demus of a lion, he saw the Demus of a shor, an ox, and he saw the Demus of a nesher. So the Demus of a nesher is chakuk in the Kisei HaKavod. It's a non-kosher animal. The truth is the lion is also non-kosher. But it's interesting that he saw an Adam, he saw a shor,
he saw a lion, an aryeh, and he saw a nesher as well, Pashib Shad. And I saw in the Oznayim L'Torah, in Parashat Shmini, he says that the reason that these four faces are etched into the Kisei HaKavod, because they're all the Malachim, they're all the kings of their respective kingdoms. The Adam is Moshe al Haaretz, the lion is the king of the animal kingdom, the Shar is the king of the Behemoths, and the Nesher is the king of the birds. So it's more because of the fact that it's a king that it's mentioned. It's less so because of the fact that it's kosher. And Chanami, it really is a non-kosher. Another place you find the Nesher is in Parashas Yisro. So we just learned this on Shabbos. Atem re'isem asher asisi l'Mitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'ese eschem al kanfei nisharim, v'avi eschem alai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'ese eschem al kanfei nisharim. I think it's good just to digress, just to lighten the mood a little bit for a few minutes with regards to this pasuk. So we're talking about Nesher, Gzereshava Muchna. So we'll just talk about Atem Re'isem Asher Asisi LeMitzrayim Va'ese Eschem Al Kanfei Nesharim Va'avi Eschem Alai. It's interesting. It's Murgul B'Pumei De Inshi that when Mashiach comes, we're all going to go on the wings of eagles, quote unquote, and we're all going to be taken to Yerushalayim. Where does it come from? Presumably this pasuk, I think. Atem Re'isem Asher Asisi LeMitzrayim Va'ese Eschem Al Kanfei Nesharim. That's a little bit of a misnomer because this pasuk is not describing an event that's going to happen in the future. This pasuk is actually describing an event that took place in the past. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking about Chodesh HaShlishi. Let's say Bnei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim. It's Chodesh Sivan. The Yidden are about to get the Torah, and they get a little shmooze right before Kabbalah Satorah v'Yisrael Yisugulim Mikol Ha'amim v'Atam Tilim Mamlachas Kaina v'God Kadosh. Some of the most beautiful psukim in the Torah are right here in Parashas Yisro. And one of the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'yikra Elav Hashem in Ahar Leimor Koisoi Malaveis Yaakov v'Sagad B'nei Yisrael. This is the Musa Shmuzes of all Musa Shmuzes. Atem Ro'isim Esher Tzizim Mitzrayim v'Es Eschlan Kafin Nishon. The truth is the Rishonim discuss when exactly did this happen. When in history did this take place? HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I took you on the wings of eagles. So Rashi already addresses the question. Rashi says that we know that when Yidden were in Mitzrayim, where did they live? They lived in Goshen. But when they left Mitzrayim, where did they depart from? Where was the proverbial airport? Where did they leave Mitzrayim from? They left from Ramses. So how did all of Klal Yisrael, the Chamushim, all Bnei Yisrael, Mitzrayim, how did they get to Ramses? To be able to exit Mitzrayim and begin the 40-year journey in the Midbar. Says Rashi, this is the day that the Yidden went to Ramses. They were spread throughout Goshen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden on the wings of eagles, and he took them to Ramses. That's what the pasuk is referring to when it says if you look in the Targum Yonasan on this pasuk, so this is Aramaic, not so easy to read. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden on Anani HaKavod, Hey Ka'al Gadfei Nishrin, which was like Kanfei Nishar, not literally Kanfei Nishar. It was like Kanfei Nisharim. Min Pilusen. Va'ivelus Yaschin. And where did he take the Yidden? So he went on Kanfei Nisharim. Where? La'asar Beis Muktasha. He took them to the Beis HaMikdash. L'meva Tamon Pischa. To be able to bring the Karban Pesach. We know the Yidden brought a Karban Pesach when they were in Mitzrayim. They brought the Pesach Mitzrayim. Where was the Pesach Mitzrayim brought? Pasha, it was brought in Mitzrayim. That's the Pesach Mitzrayim. No, it wasn't brought in Mitzrayim. It was actually brought in the Makam HaMikdash, but the Yidden were in Goshen, they were in Ramses. How did they get to the Makam HaMikdash? Says the Targum Yonasan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden, he took them on the Anani HaKavod, Ubahu Leilya. On that night, Oisivas Yaschin Lefilusin, he brought them to the Makam HaMikdash, Umitamon Krivas Yaschin Le'ufanai Raisi. And that's the end of the pasuk, Va'avi Eschem Alai. So what was the Va'esa Eschem on Kanfei? It wasn't from Goshen to Ramses, so that we should all be now ready to depart. Rather, what it meant was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden when Anani HaKavod, he brought them to Yerushalayim. I saw that. Shmuel Yankov, in his Sefer Zois Yaakov on this pasuk, so he says something beautiful. He says that we say in Parshas Kisavai, in the parsha of Mikra Bikurim, so the pasuk says, V'yivienu al hamokim hazeh, v'yitein lanu es ha'aretz hazois, erez avos chol v'dvash. So the Yiddi has Bikurim, he brings it to Beis HaMikdash, he's going to give it to the Kayanim, and he has to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See, HaKaras HaToiv starts from the beginning, Arami Yovedavi, and he works up, finally, you brought us there to Yisrael, and you gave us the land
where milk and honey flow. The parsha Bikur. So what does he say? Zok Rashi, you gave us the Beis Hamikdash. And you gave us Eretz Yisrael. So Shmuel Yaakov stelled that why does it mention first the Beis Hamikdash and then Eretz Yisrael? It should have been in the reverse order. First you gave us the Beis Hamikdash, then you gave us Eretz Yisrael. The Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael with Yeshua, but 480 years later, Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash. So really, the Beis Hamikdash chronologically came much later, centuries later, than actually getting Eretz Yisrael. Like the Targum Yonis said, it's very nice. The Yidden came first to the Beis Hamikdash. When was that? Va'avi Eschem. That's when the Yidden came to the Beis Hamikdash, and it was years later, it was 40 years later, that the Yidden got it. But regardless, that's the cheshbon. It's beautiful that it was in that order. So another shot I saw in those Naim L'Torah, again from the Lutzker Rav. So he says maybe a different shot. What does it mean? It says when the Yidden left Mitzrayim, they were in the Mentes Sharei Toma. Halalu Ovdei Avodah Zarah, V'Halalu Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Yecheskel described it in very great detail in Perek Chaf, where the Yidden were shtufin, they were steeped in the culture of the Egyptians. The Rambam talks about it in his Moreh Nevuchim. Regardless, the Yidden were in a very bad spiritual place when they left Mitzrayim. What happened? It wasn't that much later that the Yidden stood at the foot of Har Sinai and they were Makabel the Torah. They had Kriyas Yamsef where Rasa Shivcha Bayom Mashaloi Ra Yecheskel Bambuzi Lo'ilam. I mean, they needed mitzvahs in order to be Zeicha. So they had V'ever Alayich, V'erich Mispaiseses B'damayich, V'oimelach B'damayich Chayiv Damayich Chayiv Amila Dam Pesach. They were pushed trying to chap a mitzvah so that they should have some schus to. But with the Yidden, they went 0 to 60 in a nanosecond. They literally went from being in Mitzrayim, Halalu and all of a sudden they're bringing a carbon Pesach, and there's this Kanfei Nesharim, and all of a sudden there's Kriyas Yamsef, Rasa Shivcha Bayom, Mashaloi Roy Yecheskel Bambuzi, Vatem Tili Mamleches Koyanim V'Goy Kodesh, and then the Makabel the Torah where every single Yid was a Navi, the Rambam in Perek Ches, Milchus Yisoidi HaTorah. I mean, all the schools, everything that we know, this all happened in such a short period of time. So he said the Yidden went from being so low to so high in such a short period of time. Not just physically, where they were avodim ayinu l'par b'mitzrayim vayotzienu Hashem, but spiritually, says the Lutzker Rav. That's the emphasis. Va'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden and he put them on the proverbial kanfei nesharim. He brought them so high spiritually. He lifted them up from the depths of the tumah that they were in. So now they should be in the madrega, where they should be able to see Mashalei Roy Yecheska Babuzim Yoilam, where they should be able to be Makabel Torah. The Kanfei Nesharim, the Kanfei Nesharim suggests that it's very, very high. Rashi says, why the Nesher? Why not any other bird? Says Rashi, Kinesher hanoise goizolov al knafav. Like the nesher, when it carries its children, it carries it on top of its wings. Shekol shara oifois, all the other birds, noisnin as b'neim ben ragleim. When they carry their children, they carry them beneath them, in their feet. Because they're worried about a bird that flies higher than them, it should come after them. But this nesher enoi misyori elamina adam. He's only worried about the person. Shem yizrak b'cheitz. He goes, he flies higher than any other bird. There's no bird that flies as high as him. It's for that reason that he puts him on top of his birds. Said HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I did the same exact thing. It says, the Yidden didn't just go, they didn't just travel. This wasn't just an airplane, quote unquote, a Boeing. This was they were as high as you can possibly be. And the Lutzker Rav, he says it so beautifully. He says, ordinarily when somebody finds himself in a dark place and he wants to creep out, it's not so easy to creep out. It could take time, it could be work. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ve'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim. I was thinking that Rav Tzadok HaKohen says that the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim is something that, although it was an event, it was an episode that happened at one point in history, but every single person can find himself in his own Mitzrayim. And every person has to leave his own Mitzrayim. And a lot of the skulos that you find that happen, B'chipazoi, and the idea of everything that, of Mikamoy Dora, Isa Kafalai Kadosh Baruch Hu, Har Kigiyas, these are things that sometimes will repeat themselves in a person's life. So perhaps this idea as well, that sometimes the Kadosh
HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees a person, he's struggling, he's in a very dark place, he's in a place of Memtesh Shari Tumah, but there's a midah of the SS where HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take a person and he'll lift him up to the highest of all highs, just to bring him closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is something that we could all be zoichet to in our own personal Yitzias Mitzrayim. But just to end on a more technical note, and that is, so what exactly is the Nesher? So again, on wings of eagles, right? It comes from this pasuk, Al Kanfei Nesharim. But is the Nesher really the eagle? So the truth is that it's a machlokes Rishonim. Some Rishonim seem to attribute this Nesher to the eagle, whereas others seem to suggest that it's not. In fact, when the Ramban talks about the Nesher, so the Ramban refers to it as the bald Nesher, which would be very tempting for an amateur to say, oh, the bald Nesher, it's the bald eagle, right? The Nesher is the eagle, the bald eagle, this is the national bird of the United States of America. So it would seem to be a very natural segue. Just lahavdol for a moment, so you know that the bald eagle, that's the symbol. It's the national bird, it's the national animal of the United States of America. It appears on some of your shekels that you have in your pocket. So it's interesting that after the founding fathers decided that the bald eagle should be the national bird, so Benjamin Franklin wrote the following letter. Apparently he wasn't so happy about it. I quote, he said, "I wish that the bald eagle had not been chosen as the representative of our country. He is a bird of bad moral character. He does not get his living honestly. You may have seen him perched on some dead tree, where too lazy to fish for himself, he watches the labor of the fishing hawk, and when that diligent bird has at length taken a fish, and is bearing it to its nest for the support of his mate and young ones, the bald eagle pursues him and takes it from him. Besides, he is a rank coward. The little kingdom, not bigger than a sparrow, attacks him boldly, and drives him out of the district. He is therefore by no means a proper emblem for the brave and honest of America." Now his suggestion was that the turkey should be the national bird of the United States. That's a whole nother discussion. So my Muschorish, I stumbled upon this letter, and I said, oh, look at this. So the eagle, first of all, he's not such a melech after all. I mean, Benjamin Franklin seemed to describe him as a rank coward. He's also a bird of bad moral character. So, I mean, that would explain maybe why he's the symbol of the non-kosher bird. But the truth is, this is all a mistake. Number one, the bald eagle is not bald. It has hair. It has white hair, and because it has white hair, based on the etymology of the word bald, he's known as the bald eagle. But it's not simply because he's kareach migano mikan. That's not the reason that he's called the bald eagle. Regardless, this bald nesher that the Ramban was describing was really bald. It really had no hair. But either way, some do say that the nesher is the eagle. But it seems that the more conventional approach to what exactly the nesher is it's actually a vulture. It's specifically the Griffon vulture, Griffon, the Griffon vulture. That seems to be what it is. I'll just tell you, I researched it a little bit, just one interesting anecdote, and that is that the Griffon vulture flies very, very high. See, I left this at home, I have the wrong page, but regardless, it flies very high. In fact, the highest recorded flight that a bird ever took was in the early 1970s. There was a bird that crashed, believe it or not, with an airplane flying over West Africa. Its altitude was 37,000 feet, and it was none other than the Griffon vulture. Rashi says that there's no oif that is peireach higher than the nesher. It's the highest, thus it's able to take its children and not carry it underneath him, but rather put it on top of it. It's the Griffon vulture, which it seems most Rishonim held was the nesher.